From the horned screamer and the North American bufflehead to the dunkadoo and the honey creeper. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm the white-crested jay.
You got me with that one. I'm the white-crested jay.
And I messed it up. I'm the white-throated jay.
Right. Well, I am Danny Nucci. I don't know. I'm the Nooch Bird. What up? Nooch Bird here.
Nooch Bird, the rare Nooch Bird.
The rare Nooch Bird.
So, two things I just wanted to say. First, I wanted to wish my wife a happy anniversary.
I was going to say happy anniversary. I was going to
Thank
say
you.
happy anniversary to you and the wonderful and saintly Kate.
The rare North American Kate who brings me coffee right before our calls all the time. And then also, I was curious if you would like to take 2-3 months off, jump in the car, and then go look for birds.
Bro, now I would. I'm telling you, man, the way he was talking about it and just some of the things that I read, I mean, just the idea of just really being present in nature with the bird just sounded great, which is definitely not anything if anybody could pitch me on. I'd be like, no, good luck. There's like 947 other things I'd prefer to do. But now I'm starting to question that. I mean, maybe I'm just, I don't know. There's something really appealing about it.
I think people will be able to get this vibe just in listening to the interview.
What did you just say?
People will be able to get the vibe. What did I say?
Ebel? People will be able to get this vibe?
Is that what I said?
Ebel.
Oh
I heard
God.
Ebel.
People will be
I heard Ebel. I was like, did he just say Ebel?
Able to get the vibe when they listen to Kenn Kaufman in our interview here is that he's just
he
so
said rough,
peace.
And I almost said something. I just thought, that's not nice. You're not nice, Danny.
It's just the day. It's the day. But,
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's something very peaceful about him. So it makes sense that he is a birder and just watches because he's just very at ease with seems life.
I know he's such a chill dude, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy talking to him. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy listening. Here is the extremely bird-informed, passionate, artistic Kenn Kaufman.
Before we get into the topic of our episode, which is birds, we wanted to learn more about you, and we're going to talk about the book as well. The way I see it, two things had to converge for you to become the birding legend that you are. Is not only did you have to love birds, but you had to become a great artist. I'm curious how the latter happened. How did art come into your life?
Well, I don't think I have achieved the status of being a great artist, but
What does drawing them allow you to do that photographs does not?
Waste a lot of time. It's a lot slower. It's a lot slower, But I think in trying to draw a bird, you see details. In trying to draw anything, you see details that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Well, I mean, for being a birding person, going fast doesn't seem to be a particular trait that works in terms of being a bird enthusiast.
Not usually. I mean, we do have these things called big days where we try to see as many kinds of birds as we can in 24 hours and, drive, 500 miles starting at midnight and ending at midnight. And that goes fast. But most of the time we're much more in the moment and moving more slowly and just looking at stuff.
Question: When you what do you think? I mean, obviously you've had time to think about this, and you've probably answered this question 1,000 times, but I don't care. What was the impetus for birds? What happened when you were 6 or 7 years old that made you go, "This is fascinating to me," and it speaks to a part of me that I've now as an adult can look back and go, "That makes sense."
Well, I didn't really get into birds until I was 6, and I sometimes look back and think about all the wasted years before that. But I liked to be looking at picture books of nature, big nature, bears, dinosaurs, tigers. But we were living in the suburbs in Indiana, and we didn't have any of those things. And eventually, I started to notice these birds around. And I was kind of a slow kid, just wandering around, daydreaming. And you start looking at birds, and they're just so intense, so fast moving. If you're 6 years old and you're crawling across the lawn and there's a sparrow there, you get close and it's looking at you and there's so much intensity there. You realize if this thing was 30 feet tall, it would eat you without a second thought. But fortunately, it's not. But there's just so much intensity there, and it's so alert, and the reflexes are so quick, and it can take off and fly away at any moment. And for me, that was just fascinating. And then I started wondering. I started looking at other stuff like these little blackbirds wandering around on the lawn. It took me 3 weeks to figure out the difference between a starling and a grackle. But once I had that, I was the only kid on my block who could do that. And so,
And did you know the names, or at that point you just go, "This is a one type of bird, and this is a different type of bird"?
well, I was figuring out that they were two different types. They walked differently. The starling had a short tail, etc. And so there was a branch library not far away.
No Google then,
And I
right?
could
You
walk.
couldn't just.
Yeah, poor kid. I mean, could you imagine a 6-year-old Ken with Google? Forget it.
Oh no, man! No, this was hundreds of years before Google. But no, there was a branch library just a few blocks away, and I would walk down there and sit on the floor and pull books off the shelves, and then until I got chased out. But so I could find pictures and go back and forth, and so that's the starling. That's the starling there. Um, and it's going to look completely different in a few months because it changes plumage during the year. But so just gradually, looking at stuff, and eventually a relative gave me some old bird books and some old Audubon magazines from before I was born, and I just I never looked back after that.
Well, this was probably part of. I mean, we're all from different generations than the kids now, where you were said go outside and occupy yourself until dinner time, and so this is probably how you spent a lot of that time. Were your parents supportive of this naturist side of you?
Yeah, my parents were wonderful. They weren't especially interested in nature, but they encouraged. I have three brothers, um, and we all wound up with very different interests. And my parents were encouraging to all of us. And so, we went all different directions. We still, when we get together, the conversation can go any direction. But yeah, they were encouraging, and couldn't understand what I was doing, but they never tried to discourage me from it.
Now, when you became a teenager, and obviously you were still, I mean, like an early teenager, 12, 13-year-old boy, right? Everything's about your friends and your crew, right? So were they like, what is with this birding? Or did you have birding friends?
Well, yeah, I didn't at first, but I hung out with
Like, Ken, he's the bird
that
kid.
kid. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. And
Trying
it's,
to impress girls with your grackle knowledge,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
that's right. When you're in high school, there's nothing better. But no, I had a little gang of friends. There were just four of us. We shared a bunch of classes. We called ourselves Coxey's Army because one of the guys, Jeff Cox, it's just a name. But I got Jeff into birding because I didn't know anyone else who was into it. So the two of us would go out and look for birds together. And he went on to actually get a PhD in ornithology, and I didn't. But
Wow.
Oh, wow. So look at you.
Yeah.
Look what you did
so
for that
yeah,
guy.
I ruined his life. Yeah, it was.
Ruined it, or gave him a passion.
Yeah.
Depends on how you look at it.
You mentioned Indiana, Ken, but eventually you moved to Kansas, right?
That's right, yeah.
At some point. Did that open up the door for you to see new species that you weren't seeing in Indiana that maybe even piqued your interest even more?
Yeah, it did. And actually, the getting ready to move there was a big educational thing for me because we moved about the time of my ninth birthday, and so I was studying before that. My dad was applying for jobs all over the place, and so I'd look at books. By that time, I had a couple of books, and I would figure out, okay, well, if we move to Seattle, there'll be these things, and so, very early, I got the idea that, yeah, different birds have different ranges and different ecological requirements. And that's heavy stuff when you're 8 years old. And so then when we moved to Kansas, I knew for sure we were going to be seeing different birds. And we
Hmm.
did.
And so Coxey's Army, that was a Kansas-based outfit?
For us, it was. Yeah. I mean, it was just four kids.
Yeah. All right.
So let's cut to you're out of high school, right? I think you're still in high school, right? And you decide, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna drop out, and I'm just gonna hitchhike across the country and start looking at birds. Can you talk a little bit about how that germ of an idea came came to be, and also your parents' reaction to it and your first experiences while you were out doing it. 3-part question.
Yeah, wow. Well, my parents were not thrilled, but I had been a pretty independent kid. Years later, my dad told me that if any of my brothers had wanted to leave school and go do things, they would have been denied permission. But my parents thought that, I would go do this and then I would come back and go back to school. But
Where were
you
you
know,
in the age hierarchy of the brothers?
I was the second out of four.
Okay, all right.
So my older brother got all the abuse, and I got the benefit of his trailblazing. But as I had been in honors classes, I'd been doing well in school, getting good grades, and my teachers were, mystified that I would want to leave. But I was looking at that point, I knew a lot about birds. I knew a ton about birds, and none of that had come from schooling. That had all come from my own paying attention and reading and going, haunting the city library and stuff. And so I thought, well, that suggests to me that self-education can work, and I'm going to go try it. And there are tons of birds that are never going to show up in Kansas. And so I just started going out and hitchhiking across the country, which was the only kind of travel I could afford.
But, self-education is one thing, but self-safety is another thing, Ken. I mean, that is not in any time, never mind then, now, whenever, that can be a dangerous thing. Did you take that into account when you said, okay, I'm only 16, I'm going to make it to X, Y, and Z locations, but I need to get there safe? Like, what was your plan if something went bad?
Plan? Plan? What?
Plan, he says? What do you mean, plan?
What? Plan? Yeah, no plan can possibly work, so we have no plan. Yeah. So no, I was just too dumb to know better, and I did get into dangerous situations, and of course, I never told my parents about that. My parents thought I was living a charmed life out there, and that everybody I met, everyone who gave me a ride while I was hitchhiking, they were all scholars and noble people and wonderful and sober, but I I survived the experience and had some close calls.
Survived and wrote about it in Kingbird Highway, right? Is that essentially an account of that period of your life?
It is, yeah. And Kingbird Highway, I guess I could say I'm proud of that book. I wrote the rough draft of it shortly after the experience, and the rough draft was just
Well, that's
awful.
cool. So it was fresh.
It was fresh.
Yeah.
And it read like something very
Fresh.
very not fresh. I mean, my original manuscript was terrible. It was hundreds and hundreds of pages of just awful writing, and at least I had the sense to realize that. So at the time, I just threw it in a box and left it for years, and dug it out like 15 years later and started looking at it again, and eventually it got published.
But what's nice is that because you recorded the memories in essentially real time, you didn't lose anything. It was all there on the page, and you could just like rewrite it the way you needed to.
Yeah, and I think I was really lucky to have done that. These days I was trying in 1973. I hate to say just how long ago it was, because that's ancient times, but I was a teenager, and I was trying to see as many kinds of birds that year as I could. And this thing of doing a big year has become a really popular thing now. Lots of young people go and do this like a 1 year, running up a big bird list. And I've um, I have lots of friends who are young birders, who are teenagers and 20 somethings. And I think it's because they've read Kingbird Highway. So in their mind, I'm stuck in time as like a teenager. And so they feel like they can talk to me. And I'm really lucky to have all these young friends. And a lot of them have done this thing where they'll go do a big year and then they want to write a book about it. And I don't try to discourage them from writing about it, but I tell them that I was so lucky that I wrote it and then put it aside and then went back to it. And, I know you're eager to write about what you did last year and publish it, but you might consider the possibility of waiting, writing it down while it's fresh.
Perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then coming back to it with the wisdom that you will hopefully gain eventually and that you certainly don't have now.
So I'm interested. You're obviously an enthusiast at this point, and you're out somewhere. I don't know. I'm going to call it at some point you ended up in Wyoming, right? I'm making up that you ended up in Wyoming at some point.
Oh yeah.
And you're sitting there and you're looking at these birds and there's no one around but you and your birds. What is that experience? You're like, if I see an amazing bird and there's no one to tell it about it, did I see the amazing bird? I mean, it's such a personal experience. I know I'm being glib a little bit, but it is such a personal experience. I mean, the satisfaction of it and the being able to observe it in your own time is kind of a unique experience, isn't it? To you?
Because it's you and the bird, really. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But it works both ways. I mean, I love, I do a lot of birding alone still. I mean, even here, where I live in northwestern Ohio, there will be tens of thousands of birders for a few weeks in late spring, because it's a big migration hotspot. But even then, sometimes I'll be out birding alone, and it's easier to take things in that way. It's easier to sketch things, to really study and see details that I hadn't seen before. But I also love being out with other people, especially if they're just getting into it and seeing these things for the first time. And we got okay, this is a cardinal. It's a red bird. It's dirt common. There are millions of them. I've seen a million of them, but if you have someone who's really seeing a cardinal for the first time and they're freaking out completely.
The beauty about the cardinal, though, Ken, is that if you're from another country, the cardinal would be a pretty cool looking bird. If you've never seen it before, it doesn't look like any other birds.
Exactly, yeah. And if you step back and take that perspective of the person who's seeing it for the first time, it's still a really cool looking bird.
What a great experience to see it for the first time with you around. They hit the jackpot. They're like, this is amazing. And there's Ken going, if you want to know more about it, I'm happy to tell you. If you go to Northwest Chile in early January, you'll be amazed.
You will, yeah, right. You'll be and cold.
I like to think that some of the birds are out there looking for you, Ken. That's how you find them, because they're like, "Ooh, I found Ken out in the wild looking for us. We're looking at him.
He's gonna make me famous with one of his paintings." By the way, your paintings, which I know we're gonna get into in a minute, but I gotta say, I looked over. Your birds look so stoic and regal. I mean, is that just your experience? I mean, they really do. They look very regal, very like I don't know, if you put like a crown on each of them, it would make sense.
Yeah, well, there are birds that don't look regal at all, and I just don't paint those.
Oh, there you go. There it is.
There are some birds that look ridiculous, but I just forget that. There's another.
Can we quote you on that?
Sure. Why not? Why not? Yeah, the birds won't hear me.
Let's talk about the current book, Ken, because I found it a really fascinating read. I'm sure people that go hiking on an Audubon trail don't know that he was a real person. Everybody doesn't know. Can you talk about why you wanted to write this book, and just sort of how the idea came to you to combine birds with the history of it, and just how so many were missed to history?
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, the book, it's called "The Birds That Audubon Missed," and the book isn't really focused on Audubon as a person. He's one of a number of characters in it. But it's marketing. We put his name in the title because it's recognizable.
Sure.
But most of the birds in eastern North America were well known to science by around 1820 or 1830. Most of the birds in eastern North America had been known to indigenous people for millennia before that, but we don't have that much recorded of what they knew. It hasn't, that we just have fragments remaining from the wisdom that they had developed over so many generations. So, European Americans come in and they're trying to figure out what are all these bird things here, and they're describing them under what we call the Linnaean system and giving them scientific names. And most of them were, by the time John James Audubon really got going on his big project around 1820, most of the birds in eastern North America were already known and named. And so he was just sort of going around doing cleanup and looking for undiscovered ones. But just the sense of that adventure of going out and just knowing that you could go around a bend in the trail and see something that is unknown to science, it's like, if you're a scientist, that the phrase "unknown to science," you sort of speak it in reverent tones.
It's like being an explorer in a way, right? You're out there trying to find new lands.
Definitely, yeah. There's looking for a continent that no one has found before, which is not likely to happen. But the that whole sense of discovery just really appealed to me because when I was a little kid, if I saw a bird for the first time, I'd say, "Look, I discovered this thing." Even if there was a picture of it in a book down at the library. Look, I discovered this thing. It's called a grackle. Um, you know, the that sense of discovery was part of it, but also I became fascinated with the fact that even with all these guys running around trying to find the last unknown birds and competing with each other and trying to cut each other off and insulting each other and so on. I mean, they were very competitive. There were some that they managed to overlook for years. Some
Right under
birds,
their nose,
yeah,
Ken? Was that the idea?
yeah. I mean, some were relatively rare. Like Kirtland's warbler is a rare bird, so it's not too surprising that nobody found it until the 1850s. In fact, the first one was noted like just a few months after Audubon himself had died, which seems, sort of like adding insult to injury. But
100%. Yeah.
yeah, others were common.
You touched on the sort of drama of it all, the competitive nature of it. And I think that's what really drew me into your book as well, because it sort of highlights all of the rivals and the grudges and the lies that were made, and they sort of got wrapped up in the hoopla of their own destiny in a way.
Oh,
Yes.
they did. Yeah, there was just such a sense of like glory or immortality of being the first person to describe this bird formally. That means that your name will be attached to it forever. Um, in the official checklist, it will say that this bird, the carbonated warbler, was described by Audubon, and the carbonated warbler doesn't exist. But if it did, he would get the credit for having done this fake painting of it and having written about this thing that isn't really out there.
He wasn't breaking any laws, breaking any rules, but were there any ramifications for his making up of certain breeds of
Well,
birds?
they certainly helped his marketing for a while. I
Mhm.
mean, it was
Mhm.
it was when there was a point he was struggling. Audubon. It was like late 1820s. He'd been struggling with bankruptcy and poverty and so on. Finally, he can't even find a publisher in the United States, so he goes to England and he's just on the verge of getting his stuff published, but he's having trouble finding subscribers and so on. So he makes up this bird that he calls the bird of Washington, an eagle. It's like a bald eagle, but it's like 25% larger. This is the most regal bird
It's
in
like a
North America, and I'm
thunderbird, right? Like a
yeah, yeah,
you know,
and I'm going to name it for George Washington, because by that time it's half a century after the American Revolution, and people in
So he had marketing down.
yeah, yeah, he definitely knew marketing. People in Britain by that time were fascinated with George Washington. The wounds from the revolution had healed, and so here's this, the most magnificent bird of prey in America, and it's named for George Washington. Yeah, we have to buy the publication that's got the painting of that bird,
mm.
and so he makes up all these details and he writes about it, and there was no such thing.
At what point
But
is it revealed that there's no such thing?
well, some people are still having trouble figuring that out.
Of course they are.
Yeah, there was so much reverence for the great Audubon for more than a century after his death that there were things in his writings that obviously didn't add up, but people would say, well, he made a mistake here,
Mhm.
um, and it's only. I mean, part of what drew me into this, I was curious about these mistakes of Audubon, so I started reading all of his publications in great detail. And people who really know birds in a modern sense hadn't done that very much. And once you get into it, it's really obvious that there are things there that he was just making up. He was just, you know,
Fake
he
bird
wanted,
news.
he had his, yeah, big bird news. Yeah, fake bird news. His big rival was Alexander Wilson, who had passed away already, but he was still Audubon just really felt this intense sense of rivalry with Alexander Wilson.
With a dead guy,
And-
is what you're saying.
With the dead guy, yeah. Well, with the ghost of
Sure.
the ghost of Wilson.
So it all comes down to legacy for both of them in a way. They just want to go down in history as the person who identified the most birds.
That's right. I'm the man. And so Audubon was not nearly as good a scientist as Wilson, but he was always trying to imply that he knew everything better. So, Wilson found one of this bird, and Audubon will say, I went there and I found 24, and but he would write about.
Well, I found 19 of them in one spot, bro.
Yeah.
Hey, dude, I got more, bro. Mine have more colors, dude.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Mine is. It's got an 11-foot wingspan. Yeah. So in cases where Audubon didn't have the information, he would just make things up and fill it in and say, well, Wilson didn't know much about this bird, but I found its nest, and he would describe something that's nothing at all like the actual nest of the bird.
Always trying to one up him. Always trying to one up his rival.
Oh yeah,
nice.
But pretending to be polite and saying, well, I hate to contradict the great Wilson, but.
However,
but I will.
But I will. Yeah. But now that you mention it.
What about birds?
What has continued this for 6+ decades now? Do you find that you appreciate them in different ways now than you did when you were first going to the library and looking up what a grackle is?
Well, it's evolved to he's painting them so specifically. I mean, you start as a 6-year-old, but now I can see that this thing is evolving still 6 decades later.
That's right. Well, I think it's a kind of fascination that's never going to end. And there's so many reasons for that. I mean, part of it is just variety. There are more than 11,000 different species of birds in the world, and no one is ever going to see them all. I've seen, about half of them.
I was going to say, you're close, though.
No. No, I've seen about half of them. A friend of mine recently hit the milestone of having seen 10,000 of the 11,000 species of birds.
Wow.
But from this point on, each one that he goes after is going to be a real challenge, something on, one mountaintop in the Congo or something.
Right, in August, right?
In August, right,
It's like just one big montage shot of him doing all these difficult things.
Right, at night, yeah. And so, no one's ever going to see them all, but there's just so much endless variety. And a big thing for me is that they're predictable and unpredictable. If we were to go out birding, anywhere in North America, and we should, it'd be a blast. If we were to go out birding together, I could predict 85% of what we would see at a given place and time, which it's nice that they're predictable in that way.
Is that based on your understanding of the environment or the birds that are going to be in that environment?
Yeah, it's both. It's the habitats, it's the migrations of the birds, the timing. They're pretty predictable in where and when they occur. So, the chimney swifts are coming back. They're just now arriving back in northern Ohio, having come from their wintering grounds in South America. And I actually saw one as early as April 15th, but usually it's more like April 22nd, 23rd. So seeing one a little bit early is, that's cool. But they're not coming back in January. They're not waiting till June. They're predictable. But on the other hand, they're unpredictable. So if we went out, I could predict most of what we would see, but there would be surprises.
Mm-hmm.
We would miss some things that I expected, and we would see some kind of birds that I thought, well, that's, I didn't really expect that. And we might see something that's like the first record ever for that place, because birds have wings and sometimes they, they go way out of range. So you've got the predictable and the unpredictable side by side. There's so much beauty to them. I mean, some of the most lovely creatures in the universe are wild birds, but then there's some that are, frankly, that are ugly, and
and non-stoic looking, as we talked about.
Yes, the aforementioned non-stoic, regal-looking bird. Sure,
that's right.
What I love about Kenn, so I'm a big gardener. I do a lot of, like native plants. And once I started really establishing the garden, I saw just how many birds moved into the area. And what I love is like you were mentioning that predictability. Like I have like hummingbirds that'll come at the right time of season for the right blooms, and they have their own patch. One won't go next to the other patch, and one will stay here. They seem very territorial about what they love, but they always seem to know where their feeding grounds
That's
are.
right. Yeah, and the connection to certain plants, certain habitats, certain seasons, and native plants. By the way, a huge shout out for putting in native plants. That's so important for every living thing. Um, so yeah, they're predictable in that way. They're beautiful to look at, but some are not. Some of them have wonderful, amazing songs, like
I was going to ask you about that. The difference between songs and calls. I think on the Audubon website, I saw, ask Ken. So I'm going to ask Ken the difference between bird calls and bird songs. And can you talk a little bit about the most fascinating, interesting ones that you've heard?
Oh, sure. Yeah, most birds have got calls, and those are just like any kind of note that they'll give at different times of year. And some are like alarm calls or aggressive calls or begging calls from the kids. But then the song, that's mostly the males, and the song tends to be longer and more complicated, and it's for specific purposes. They're claiming their territory, saying, this is my turf, and so you other dudes stay out. But any females that are passing through, it's like, hey, baby. Um, so they're the songs are.
Yeah, ladies are free.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. No,
Ladies get in free. I get
no
it.
cover charge. Yeah. So the song is for establishing territory and attracting a mate, and it tends to be longer and more melodious. And some of them are beautiful, but some are not. I mean, some. One of my favorite bird songs in the world is there's a bird in New Zealand called the kokako. It's a big, sort of like a gray crow with these blue wattles on its face, and it sounds like it's improvising on an electric organ back in the forest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these soft sort of it's singing chords. It can sing two notes at once, so it's back in there singing these beautiful things. Um, just a wonderful sound. With the wood thrush in North America, it sounds like church music. Beautiful flute like sounds. But then there's a South American bird called the great potu that sounds like it's trying to win a vomiting contest. It's really sort of just a horrible noise.
Here where I live, Ken, we have a lot of hawks, and I love when you can hear them whistling up ahead. You start to hear the warning signals from all the other birds because I live around a forest area, and just all the warning whistles and calls of "Hey, watch out for this
Yeah.
this guy
Yeah, they
overhead."
have specific purposes. Some of the different calls, like, red-winged blackbirds are really common where I am because there are a lot of marshes here close to Lake Erie, and red-winged blackbirds are making noise all day. They, at least in the summer. But if a hawk comes over, they all switch to a different sound and start doing this peer, peer, peer. So anytime you hear that, you look around and there's going to be a hawk overhead.
Let's talk about why birds are so important. You mentioned the native plants, like I had put in here at the gardens. Why are they so important to our ecosystems, and why should we and other people be doing?
Well, there's this whole subject of ecosystem services and all the things that different creatures do. And if you suddenly got rid of all the birds, we would be overrun with insects in very short order. Um, they it would be uh,
I think there's a movie somewhere there.
there is, and actually, there's a historical precedent. There was a period in China when Chairman Mao decided that the sparrows were eating too much of the grain in the fields, and so they had this great purge where everyone was supposed to go out and kill the sparrows, kill all the birds, and they killed all these small songbirds, and as a result, insect populations just exploded and destroyed the crops, and it was like you can't mess with the balance of nature too much without coming back to bite you.
Yeah, bad move, Mao.
Yeah.
It's Jurassic Park. That's
Yeah,
what it
yeah,
is.
right, yeah. Don't do that again.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a big part of it. Just the way they fit into the ecosystem. They eat so many insects, keep those populations in check. They don't wipe them out, but they keep them in check. They eat weed seeds. It's sort of maintain the balance. Um, It's and it's not like they're working towards some specific goal where they're going to wipe out every last mosquito on the planet, but just keeping things in balance in natural systems is a big part of it. But I think personally, I think there's great spiritual value to having birds around too, and it doesn't just have to be an economic thing. Something that was interesting was that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the interest in birding really exploded. It
Yeah,
really
exploded,
increased.
right? Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
reading about that. Like, but like by leaps and bounds.
Yeah, it did. It was amazing, and suddenly people who had never noticed them before, they were stuck at home, so they look out the window and there's a bird out there. And sales of bird feeders and bird seed went through the roof when other things were, other aspects of the economy were not doing well. And suddenly the owners of these little wild bird feeding stores were rolling in it. And which is not, I don't want to get back to the economic side of it, but so many people found inspiration and interest in just looking out back and
And
seeing.
peace. There's a peace to it.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a real peace and calm of, okay, everything is crazy out there, but in my backyard, it's all working.
yeah,
Well, they found a new way to be present, right? They found a new way to be
yeah,
just exactly where they are.
exactly. Yeah, that's so important. That yes, there are bad things going on out there, but we can go out back and listen. And there's a house finch singing out there, and it's just these beautiful trills and things, and it has a calming effect. And I can sit and look at that house finch and look at that beautiful red color on it, and I think a lot of people found comfort in being able to focus in on birds during what was a very stressful time.
Ken, you mentioned 1973, I think was the year you did the trip.
Yeah.
Have we lost here in the States? Have we lost bird species since then? Are there things that you can't see now that you could have seen then?
Very few. We've had very few losses in terms of actual species. There was a bird called the dusky seaside sparrow, which is just as spectacular as it sounds.
I was going to
That
say,
I,
sounds fantastic.
yeah, right. It's the
It sounds
sapphire
like I
spangled.
can't miss.
bird of
You
paradise.
can't
Yeah,
miss
right.
that one.
Yeah, well, it's like other seaside sparrows, it's a little bit more dusky. But yeah, I mean that I went to see that a couple of times while I was a teenager, and that bird is extinct now. And there were birds that were just barely found along the border that had become harder to find. But there haven't been, aside from that, there really haven't been extinctions, and some birds are doing a lot better. The bald eagle numbers have really increased.
Yeah.
Peregrine falcons, brown pelicans were in trouble back then. Ospreys, a lot of these birds that we were worried about that were considered endangered in the 1970s have made a great comeback.
I never saw bald eagles here. I live in Massachusetts, where I lived growing up, and now we see them all the time here. And it was so not common as in the 80s and 90s when I was growing
Oh
up.
yeah, yeah. Their population has increased so much. I mean, I'm in Ohio, and in the late '70s, there were 4 nesting pairs of bald eagles, and now it's well over 400 nesting pairs.
Wow.
They're everywhere. I see them over my backyard, literally every day.
Did you pick going back to Ohio because of the birding there, or just because it's your original home, that area of the world, of the country?
Well, I'd been living in Arizona, so I certainly didn't come to Ohio for the winters here. But
Sure, I'm sure that yeah, you weren't thinking of February in Toledo.
that's
Sure.
right, yeah. But no, I partly I well, the real reason is I met this girl, and
So it was a girl. You were singing.
yeah,
You were
yeah,
singing
Listen,
your
yeah,
I just want
song.
you to
There
know
you go.
something, Ken.
yeah.
Ken, I just want you to know something. We have heard that a number of times when we're asking questions. They're like, "So how did you?" They're like, "Well, there was this
Yeah.
person." Yeah.
Yeah, well, I met this girl named Kimberly, and she and I both were doing sort of freelance stuff at that point. I was a writer and illustrator and editor, and I could do that work from anywhere. And she was flexible, but she had gotten involved with a bird observatory on the shore of Lake Erie in Ohio. And I was reading about it in this tremendous area for bird migration, and this bird observatory where she was volunteering was doing this good stuff. So well, let's live in northern Ohio for a couple of years and see what happens. And so now we've been married for 18 years, and Kimberly is the director. Yeah,
Congratulations.
thanks. And Kimberly is the director of the Bird Observatory. And there's now this big bird festival here that the observatory runs called the Biggest Week in American Birding. Nice, modest little name.
Yeah, that's like an Audubon marketing name right there. That's what that is.
It is. Yeah. I mean, Audubon himself would have been proud of that, but
very proud.
Yeah, but there are now tens of thousands of bird watchers who come here in April and May from all 50 states. There have been visitors here birding from 53 countries now. You talk to birders in Australia or Sweden or South Africa, and they've heard about the Biggest Week in American Birding. They've heard about McGee Marsh, which is like 5 miles from my house. And so, I moved here because of Kimberly, but now I live here, because it's one of the great birding spots in North America for a while in spring and fall.
Yeah.
And the rest of the year, we just, put up with it. Yeah.
Still in search of the great Washington eagle up there as well, I imagine.
Got to be around here someplace,
So, Ken, we have a listener question from Troy A. And Troy asks, would you be surprised if a bird species deemed extinct actually pops up one day and is still living? Is that possible?
That is both possible, and it actually has happened. There are
what?
Oh yeah, there are. There's actually there's a project now, the Lost Bird Project, where scientists from the American Bird Conservancy and other organizations are going around looking for these birds that are presumed to be extinct, and they've found some of them. There's something called the black-naped pheasant pigeon, which is, quite a mouthful.
Very descriptive.
Oh, yeah. Found on an island off New Guinea. It was thought to be extinct. They found that just a couple of years ago. There's a hummingbird called the Santa Marta Hill Star that there was just a news item about that. They rediscovered that. It hadn't been seen for quite a few years.
That's a tough one to call extinct on, because not only are they small, but they, a little hard to they migrate really far distances, right?
Well, a lot of them do, yeah. The hummingbirds we have here are long-distance migrants, but this Santa Marta Hill Star is found only from the Santa Marta Mountains in Colombia, and a very limited area and odd habitat, so it had gone missing. But this team went in there and searched the habitat and tried some new things and found it. So the Santa Marta... I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking. It's the Santa Marta saberwing.
That's it. God damn it.
Yeah. Well, there was a species new to science called the blue-throated hill star that was discovered in Ecuador less than 10 years ago. So you there's so many, there's more than 350 kinds of hummingbirds.
First of all, the fact that you can remember 18 of them at the drop of a hat is just amazing to me, just by itself. Before we let you go, I have a question. Do you have a white whale? Is there a particular bird that you are really want to see in real life that you are chasing that you have not yet seen?
You're talking about a nemesis bird.
Yes.
A nemesis bird. That's the term
for it.
Is
it a nemesis bird? Yeah, your nemesis bird. Jason's my nemesis bird. Go on.
I'm right here. I'm going to start doing bird movements.
Yeah, good. Good nemesis to have. Well, there's about 5,000 kinds of birds that I haven't seen yet. So picking just one
But is there one that you're like, I really want to see this one?
That it doesn't really reach that status until you've tried for it and missed it. It becomes a nemesis bird when you've made the attempt and missed it. And there's this bird called the white-throated jay. It's smaller than our blue jays here in the United States. Smaller and darker, and has this brilliant pattern with a white throat, and just lovely looking thing in pictures. I haven't seen it in real life. It's found in the mountains in southern Mexico, and I have gone several times looking for it, hiking around in the forest in the mountains in Oaxaca, and I still have not seen the white-throated jay. And it's getting to be, it feels personal now, like they're avoiding me. They're avoiding me intentionally, and I'm
sure they know you're coming.
Yeah.
They see you coming a mile away, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. They do. But anyway, eventually I am going to go back and see the white-throated jay. But I know from talking to friends who have pursued their nemesis birds, once you find it, there's immediately this sense of loss, and you have to pick
Yeah.
some.
I was gonna say it's a bummer, right? It's just a
Darn,
bummer, yeah.
Now I have to pick another nemesis bird and go fail to see that.
Oh man, I wanted to ask him like more like layman questions, like, okay, so do you follow birds? Have you followed a bird through its migration and taken taken a long flight to Argentina or
I
Brazil?
think that's
or,
called bird stalking. That's it goes beyond just bird
Is that?
watching.
Oh, I thought that was an actual term. I'm like, oh, birds. Well, that makes sense. But it's like the nemesis bird. I thought this was like the same term. Well, I mean, I was just thinking about his travel budget too. I mean, he's got to plan these trips to go see these birds. It's kind of it's amazing. Listen, I'm always just blown away by people's commitment to their passion. It's really something that I love about human beings. It's one of the few things I love about human beings, but one of the things I really do love about human
Well, and you touched on it in the interview, but people got to see his art too, because talk about commitment and passion for what he's doing. You have to not only go out there and find the birds, but you have to sit there quietly and then sketch the birds.
Yeah, make sure you don't make any noise. And if you miss it, you can't go, fuck!
You can't have a really loud eraser. Wee, 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 wee.
Oh, this was terrific. Get the book. The book is fascinating, man. Really, really cool.
The birds that Audubon missed.
I was going to say that, birds that Audubon missed.
Okay.
No, but I'm glad you said it. That's all that matters. One of us had to say it. Caw-caw! All right. Thanks for listening.
Music by Denny Nucci. Produced and edited by the same two people you heard hosting this show, because they have no friends.